This video is about the endocrine system, the structures and hormones that help to maintain homeostasis in your body. Endocrine is different than exocrine. Endocrine are glands that don't have ducts, so the hormones and products go directly into the blood vessels. Exocrine glands have a duct, a little tube that leaves the gland that takes the product into the blood vessels. The primary product of endocrine glands are hormones. Hormones can be protein, they can be steroid based, but they are chemical messengers. So those chemicals are going to carry some message and have some effect on a part or all of the body. The endocrine system is long-term control, unlike the nervous system. The nervous system is fairly rapid control, rapid changes, rapidly assessing information. The endocrine system typically are long-term changes, changes that take a while to go into effect. So a change in hormone levels, it takes a while before any measurable effect is seen. Here are some of the major glands in the endocrine system. We're going to start with the pituitary gland, work our way down to the thyroid and parathyroid gland, and kind of go from the superior glands to the inferior glands, the higher ones compared to the lower ones. Now, hormones are released all through the bloodstream. So how do they know where to go? Well, think of it kind of like the post office in a package. The postman reads the package label and it has your address on it. So they're just going to match the address with your front porch. In a similar way, hormones have chemical markers on them that only target certain tissues. So even though they're carried around the bloodstream, they don't target every single organ, only the organs that have those specific chemical markers. When the hormone gets to the correct location, sometimes it moves directly through the cell membrane. It diffuses directly through. Those are typically steroid-based hormones because they're lipid soluble. Steroids are lipids. But protein-based hormones don't act the same way. They fit with a receptor in the plasma membrane, and then they cause this cascading of events to happen to get that signal into the cell, into the nucleus for the changes to take place. Sometimes hormones have an antagonistic interaction. That means they're opposed to each other. The one hormone does a job, the next hormone will undo it, or do the opposite of it. Synergistic hormones amplify the effects, and permissive hormones both are necessary or nothing really happens. So a great example of antagonistic hormones would be parathyroid hormone and calcitonin. Calcitonin adds calcium to bone, but parathyroid hormone does the opposite. It releases calcium from bone. So the two are antagonistic. They do the opposite. Testosterone and follicle-stimulating hormone are synergistic. Testosterone on its own just kind of plods along. But by adding follicle-stimulating hormone, the effects are amplified. So that's a synergistic hormone. Epinephrine and thyroid hormone are permissive. Epinephrine is like a battery, but thyroid hormone is like a light. If you're missing the battery or you're missing the bulb, the flashlight doesn't turn on. Another example is human growth hormone and cortisol. You can't have one without the other, and it work very well. There are a significant number of pituitary hormones. The anterior lobe is the front side of the pituitary. The posterior is the back side. The anterior lobe has more hormones that it's releasing. And remember that the pituitary gland is controlled by the hypothalamus. The posterior lobe only releases oxytocin, an antidiuretic hormone. So ACTH stands for adrenocorticotropic hormone. A TSH stands for thyroid stimulating hormone. PRL is prolactin, human growth hormone, and follicle stimulating hormone. Human growth hormone targets all body tissues, so they all respond because we grow and the whole body grows with us. It stimulates protein synthesis within the cells, and those proteins then are going to be what causes that growth. If there is a hypersecretion of human growth hormone as a child, it results in this gigantism that we see pictured here. However, if human growth hormone increases as an adult, it results in acromegalia, where you get a thickening of bones instead of a lengthening of bones. Now, why is it that a hypersecretion of human growth hormone would cause bones to thicken instead of lengthen? Well, the answer is because those epiphyseal plates have ossified and bones can't get any longer. They can only get thicker. What if you don't have enough human growth hormone? Well, as a child, it results in pituitary dwarfism. Notice in a pituitary dwarf, the body is still proportioned, just much smaller. Prolactin, or PRL, targets the mammary glands. The mammary glands then produce milk as a result. Thyroid stimulating hormone targets the thyroid gland. It targets the thyroid gland to produce thyroid hormones. Adrenocorticotropic hormone targets the adrenal cortex. We see it kind of in the name. It's going to target the adrenal cortex to release glucocorticoid hormones. As we begin to see what the adrenal gland does and what the thyroid gland does, we'll begin to understand better why thyroid stimulating hormone is important and some of the adverse effects if something goes wrong with that chain of events. Follicle stimulating hormone targets the gonads to produce eggs or sperm, and it works with luteinizing hormone. A spike in luteinizing hormone causes the egg to be ovulated in a female. Antidiuretic hormone targets the kidneys, and it's targeting the kidneys to reabsorb water, to keep water. If there's a hyposecretion of antidiuretic hormone, that causes an increase in urination. So a person is constantly thirsty because they're constantly losing water. That condition is called diabetes insipidus. So think of it like they're constantly sipping water, but they're constantly losing it by urination. Oxytocin, so this is pituitary hormones, and this is posterior. Oxytocin is a posterior pituitary hormone, like antidiuretic hormone. It's going to target the uterine lining, which is smooth muscle, to contract. So the contraction is going to push on the uterus, on the cervix. The contraction is going to push on the cervix and the uterus, which is going to trigger this feedback where it's going to increase the contraction, which causes the hypothalamus to secrete more oxytocin, which causes an even greater contraction. And that cycle is going to continue that positive feedback mechanism until the baby's born. Oxytocin targets the mammary glands to let the milk down. So prolactin and oxytocin are going to work together. Prolactin to increase the milk production, but oxytocin to cause the milk letdown. Notice that it's stimulated by a baby's feeding. A long time ago, women sometimes got jobs as a wet nurse. That means that they would nurse someone else's baby. But that only happens after pregnancy. There's a spike in prolactin to cause that milk production, and oxytocin, OT, maintaining that production of prolactin and letting that milk down. So once a woman stops nursing, the prolactin levels drop, the oxytocin levels drop, and she's no longer producing milk like that anymore. So to keep a job as a wet nurse, you would have to continually either be pregnant or have clients that you're feeding. The thyroid gland sits in the throat. Embedded in the thyroid gland is the parathyroid gland. Thyroid hormone stimulates body cells and it affects their metabolism. So thyroid hormone helps stimulate metabolism. It also releases calcitonin, which targets bone cells to store calcium, which of course makes them stronger. Parathyroid hormone also targets bone, but in this case to release calcium. Goiter is where the thyroid gland is enlarged, and it's enlarged because of thyroid stimulating hormone. Thyroid stimulating hormone is stimulating the thyroid to produce more thyroid hormone. Well, what if the thyroid hormone can't make? What if the thyroid can't make thyroid hormone? Well, thyroid stimulating hormone is going to stimulate the thyroid gland to keep getting larger. Because if the thyroid gland were larger, then the thyroid hormone levels should increase. But if thyroid hormone is missing a vital component, then the thyroid is making the hormone, just making it incorrectly. That component is iodine. So if a person has an iodine deficiency, it's evidenced by a large growth of their thyroid gland. The cure is easy, just iodized salt. So then they get enough iodine so that their body's making the thyroid hormone correctly and the gland can shrink or atrophy back to its normal size. Now this is a negative feedback mechanism. That is, as long as the thyroid levels are normal, everything works fine. But if the thyroid levels drop, that stimulates the thyroid stimulating hormone to increase the production of thyroid hormone so the levels rise. Negative feedback does the opposite. It has a corrective effect. Positive feedback amplifies until the cycle is broken. What if a person has low thyroid levels as an adult? That results in myxedema, which looks like their face is puffy or their tissues are puffy, and it's because the metabolism is very slow. Cretinism is hypothyroid hormone as a child. So when you're going through these developmental stages, rather than having cells with the correct metabolism, those cells have low energy and that child's not able to develop correctly. Graves' disease is hypersecretion of thyroid hormone. Now your metabolism is so fast you can't gain an ounce even if you want to because you're burning calories faster than you can eat them. And so that person is going to have this kind of like very thin features, and sometimes fluid builds up behind their eye, causing their eyes to bulge out. So it looks as if they're coming right up out of the grave. Calcitonin and parathyroid hormone are antagonistic. You'll notice that it's the negative feedback mechanism. So long as calcium levels in the blood are normal, nothing changes. But if there is a rise in blood calcium, then the thyroid gland increases its calcitonin. That's going to cause the bones to uptake that calcium. The bones get stronger and they store the calcium. If the blood calcium levels get too low, the thyroid gland releases parathyroid hormone. That causes the bones to release that calcium so that the blood calcium level can increase back to normal. Why is blood calcium level important? Well, remember, muscle contraction is based on calcium. So those nerves will release a hormone. Those nerves will cause the muscle cells to release calcium, which removes the tropomyosin complex, the safety, which causes that cross bridging and then the sliding filaments. If there is a low concentration of calcitonin, it results in weak bones because they're not storing enough calcium. However, too much parathyroid hormone causes too much calcium to be in the blood, That causes kidney stones because the kidneys filter the bloodstream. The kidneys do release some hormones. Erythropoietin, or EPO, targets red bone marrow to make red blood cells. So again, it's a negative feedback mechanism. As blood oxygen levels drop, the amount of EPO will increase so that the body will make more red blood cells so they can pick up more oxygen so the oxygen levels can rise back to normal. The adrenal gland has a cortex and a medulla. The outside is the cortex, the inside is the medulla. The outside, the cortex, the names of the hormones reflect that they're part of the cortex. Glucocorticoids, mineralocorticoids, gonadocorticoids. So they reflect that they're in the cortex. Epinephrine and norepinephrine are in the medulla. Epinephrine has to do with your fight or flight. Norepinephrine has to do with your rest and digest. Well, what are these corticoids, these glucocorticoids, mineralocorticoids, and gonadocorticoids? Well, epinephrine has to do with your fight or flight. Norepinephrine has to do with your rest or digest. What about these cortical hormones? Gonadocorticoids are androgens and estrogens. Androgens, think of it like Andy, a boy. Estrogens, like Esther, a girl. Those are going to stimulate secondary sex traits. So those are going to target the gonads to release testosterone or estrogen to help stimulate these secondary sex traits. Aldosterone is a mineralocorticoid. It's going to regulate minerals like lowering potassium and reabsorbing sodium. That job is done by the kidneys. Now, Addison's disease is a hyposecretion of aldosterone and cortisol. That's also a kidney hormone. It results in things like darkened skin, craving salt, hypoglycemia, low blood sugar, muscle pain, even depression. And JFK is a very famous individual who struggled with Addison's disease. Cortisol is also Cortisol is a glucocorticoid. It's going to convert fat and proteins to glucose, sugar. And it acts kind of as an anti-inflammatory. You might have heard of individuals who get a cortisol shot, or cortisone, they might say. I got a cortisone shot. It helps lower inflammation in joints particularly. If you have too much cortisol, that results in Cushing's syndrome. Again, you can see this like uneven fat distribution, particularly in areas like the face and places you wouldn't normally expect it. Insulin is secreted by the pancreas. The job of insulin is to lower blood sugar levels. So when blood sugar levels are too high, the body releases insulin to lower those blood sugar levels. Glucagon is antagonistic. It's going to raise blood sugar levels. So it targets the liver to release glycogen and glucose so that the blood sugar levels rise back to normal. Diabetes mellitus type 1 means that the body's autoimmune system is attacking the pancreas. As a result, it can't release enough insulin. So those individuals might have to take an insulin injection to lower their blood sugar levels. So they test their blood sugar often to see what is my blood sugar level, and then they give themselves an injection of insulin so that it brings it back down to a normal level. That's diabetes mellitus type 1. Normally, it manifests itself in children, and it's nothing they did, it's autoimmune. Diabetes type 2 is insulin sensitivity. It's a different problem. This problem is that the insulin can't affect the receptors in the cells. The receptors don't acknowledge the insulin. So rather than taking glucose in, they ignore it. Those channels remain closed. This results typically after age 40. So it's an adult onset, and it's usually because of eating way too much sugar in the diet. Insulin injections would not help a diabetes mellitus type 2 patient like regulating their sugar intake would help them. Think of diabetes like a key and locks. The keys are insulin. The locks are on the doors of the cells to allow that sugar to enter the cell. If the locking mechanism starts to wear out because so many keys are using it, at some point the key's not going to fit into the lock anymore because the locking mechanism is worn out. That's diabetes type 2. Too much insulin insensitivity. Diabetes type 1 just means there aren't any keys available. So all the doors are locked, but there aren't any keys. So the glucose knocks on the door, but it can't get in until the person gives himself an insulin injection. That's like flooding the area with keys so that all the doors can be unlocked by a separate key. One of the problems with diabetes is that cells need glucose. They need it for energy. And if those cells can't get it, then certain parts of the body are more sensitive than others. For example, the feet might start to have an infection, even rot, and your nerves aren't picking up that there's even a problem. Your eyes have very sensitive nerves without that sugar. They're very sensitive to sugar. You might start to lose some vision. So generally, feet and eyes are the first indicators that there's some major problem with blood sugar levels in an individual. The thymus gland sits just above the heart, and its job is to help mature T lymphocytes. So thymus T lymphocytes. Lymphocytes are part of your immune system. As a child, your thymus gland is working great. It's building your immune library, and that helps your immune defense. As an adult, the thymus gland starts to atrophy, but you have this very strong immune library. As a senior citizen, you start to lose both. So who gets in line first when flu shots are given? Well, usually young children and senior citizens. Young children because they're building an immune library. Senior citizens because they've lost the capacity to maintain that library with the loss of their thymus gland. When there's lots of light input, that's going to suppress the amount of melatonin produced, and so the person feels awake. At night, because it's dark, that increases the amount of melatonin, which makes the person feel sleepy. So if you're having trouble sleeping, it might be because you're looking at a very bright screen, and that's suppressing your melatonin production. Some individuals, especially during the winter months, where it's dark in the northern hemisphere for long periods of time, experience seasonal affective disorder, a kind of depression and tiredness. And that's because there's so much melanin that's being produced and there's not enough light to suppress that production, so they're constantly feeling sad and tired. I hope that you understand a little bit more about hormones, how they interact in the body, and the endocrine system.